I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 2, Sunday, September 8th, 2024. The lesson is entitled, Daniel's Friends Refuse to Bow. Lesson text comes from Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 and verses 8 through 18. Related scriptures are 2 Kings 19, 14 through 37, Daniel 6, 1 through 15, Matthew 4, 8 through 11. The place is Babylon. The time is about 587 BC. Imagine what God could do through you if you were willing to take an unpopular public stand for Him. This is exactly the type of person God wants. He wants people who will go against the tide and swim against the current of popular opinion. People who will ultimately be willing to lay down their lives for the sake of the gospel and the cause of Christ. Unfortunately, many people who profess Christ are unwilling to do anything that warrants unwanted attention. They are content to go with the flow and unwilling to rock the boat. When someone tells a dirty joke, they laugh. If they are around people who are getting drunk, they overindulge. If they hear gossip, they repeat it to others. God's people are to be different from unbelievers. When we see evil, we are to stand against it. We are never to place anyone or anything above our Lord. Today's aim, facts. To acknowledge that the world we live in stands in opposition to the things of God. Principle, to stress that God's people are called to stand against whatever stands against the Lord. Application, to resolve to willingly accept unpopularity and hostility from the world because we stand up for Jesus Christ. Illustrating the lesson. We may face pressure in life to worship other things, but we must never waver in our allegiance to God. Like the 3 Jewish men, we should even be willing to die for our loyalty to Him. Practical points. 1. Those who seek to honor God are often falsely accused of dishonoring proud human leaders. Daniel 3:1, 8 through 9. 2. Those who are loyal to God will stand out from the crowd, verses 10 through 12. 3. Pride can drive people to hatred, verses 13 through 14. 4. God's people cannot negotiate victory on the world's terms, verse 15. 5. We can count on the Lord for security when the world targets us for persecution, verses 16 through 17. 6. It is better to face earthly consequences for obedience to God than to sin. Verse 18. Golden text. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O King. Daniel 3:17. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is the golden idol, Daniel 3:1. The second is the scheming informants, Daniel 3:8 through 12. And the third is the brave young men, Daniel 3:13 through 18. Introduction. To the world, people of faith are known for putting their lives on the line for seemingly trivial reasons. In the Roman Empire, some Christians allowed themselves to be thrown to the lions rather than perform one simple and seemingly innocuous task. Mutter an oath acknowledging Caesar as Lord while offering a pinch of incense. But the Christians had a loyalty to someone higher than Caesar, public opinion, or even their own lives. Their loyalty was to Jesus Christ, the true God made flesh, to whom they owed everything. For them, Jesus Christ was Lord and no one else. This same loyalty and love for God over every consideration is seen in the 3 men who are the focus of this lesson. The golden idol, Daniel 3:1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. This week, we jump ahead roughly 18 years from when Daniel and his friends were first taken to Babylon. They proved themselves faithful when the stakes seemed low by refusing to eat food that would defile them. But the possible cost for obedience grew much higher. Daniel's friends were given Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel 1 6 through 7. Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar, but the book only occasionally used it. Because of their integrity, intelligence, and Daniel's ability to interpret the king's enigmatic dream, Daniel 2, these four men rose high in the Babylonian administrative system. They were given authority uncommon for members of a captive nation. Their success provided a strong testimony to the greatness of the God they served, but there was also backlash, as we see in chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar was one of the greatest rulers of the ancient Near East. A brilliant and ruthless military commander, he transformed Babylon into the most feared, powerful, and dominant empire in the region. In short order, he conquered Assyria and Egypt, while overwhelming the small nations along the Mediterranean, including Judah. As powerful as he was, however, he would learn that there was one with infinitely greater power. Nebuchadnezzar had great respect for Daniel and his compatriots, but he had even greater esteem for his own majesty. Thus, he conceived a plan to reflect glory back on himself. Daniel 3:1 tells us that the king made an image of gold, a colossal golden statue measuring 90 feet tall by 9 feet wide. He had the enormous figure set up in the Babylonian plain of Dura. The exact location of this site is debated. Some scholars note that the name Dura survives in the name of Euripides, tributary about 5 miles from the city of Babylon. Undoubtedly, the king placed it in a prominent spot where it could be seen from a long way in all directions. Did this image depict one of the Babylonian gods, the chief one being Marduk, or perhaps Nebuchadnezzar himself? We cannot say for certain, but it was clearly an idolatrous image. The king decreed musicians to play various instruments at the dedication ceremony, to which people from far and wide were summoned. Upon hearing the music, everyone was to fall to the ground and worship the king's golden statue, verses 2 through 5. It was a loyalty test, and the penalty for not participating was uncompromising: immediate incarnation into a blazing furnace. Verse 7 informs us that, not surprisingly, compliance was swift and virtually total. When the music sounded, people of many nationalities and languages bowed down to the ground and worshiped Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. 3 individuals, however, stood out conspicuously from the crowded masses. The scheming informant, verse 8. Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, verse 9. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, verse 10. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image, verse 11. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace, verse 12. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. The preliminaries, Daniel 3:1 through 8. Most politicians today are pleased with the approval rating of 51% and absolutely thrilled if they get as high as 60%. Nebuchadnezzar, however, would not tolerate anything less than a full 100%, and he had advisors who were quite happy to take advantage of that fact. It was not long before a group of these advisors marched in with important news for the king. Verse 8 calls these advisors certain Chaldeans. This term, sometimes spelled Chaldees, occurs more than 150 times in the Bible, though its meaning changes. Initially, the word seems to have indicated one of the intimate ethnic groups in the regions of Babylon and Sumer. Notably, Abraham first lived in Ur of the Chaldees, Genesis 11:28 and 31. Over time, the Chaldeans became the predominant component of the Babylonian Empire. In Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Chaldeans is usually synonymous with Babylonians. Within Nebuchadnezzar's empire, however, the term Chaldean seems to have taken on a more specific meaning, referring to the learned class of priests, musicians, and astrologers. They rose high as royal advisors and administrators, but they suffered humiliation when they were unable to tell Nebuchadnezzar the content of his dream, much less interpret it. Daniel 2:1 through 11. To have been shown up by Daniel in this regard, verses 47 through 49, no doubt rankled them. These men, who must have been filled with resentment, found their opportunity to cut Daniel's friends down to size. They came into the king's presence and accused the Jews. 3:8. The text at this point uses Jews in a seemingly general way, but it is clear that the advisors had specific individuals in mind. But first, the accusers had to follow protocol and offer the typical flattery. O king, live forever, was the standard form of addressing the monarch. Verse 9. It was similar to God save the king, but perhaps with more emphasis on the king's own preoccupation with his supposed immortality. To set their case on solid footing, the advisors repeated to the king the content of his own decree, right down to the full list of instruments used in calling for the worship of the golden image. Verse 10. The instruments named here were somewhat different from what the terms have come to mean, since the important aspect is that it was an impressive assembly of musicians. The advisors also found it necessary to remind the king of the penalty for failing to answer the orchestral call to worship. Nebuchadnezzar surely had not forgotten this, but they eagerly brought it to his attention. Anyone who did not bow down to worship the image was to be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. Verse 11. They wished for the king to recall all these things before they informed him who had violated the decree. The accusation, Daniel 3:12. Finally, the advisors were ready to tighten the noose. They informed the king that there were a few Jews who had not complied with the king's decree. The time for generalities were now past. The malefactors were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The advisors reminded the king that these were men whom he placed in high positions of administration over the province of Babylon. The motive for this reminder was no doubt to highlight the ingratitude of these three for their promotions and to emphasize their unworthiness to fill the positions. Instead of showing appreciation to the monarch and to his gods for the high honor bestowed on them, certainly unwarranted for conquered foreigners, they had defied him. They did not serve the Babylonian king's gods, and they refused to worship his golden image. The decree regarding the golden image had not mentioned anything about serving the other gods of Babylon, but the advisors must have felt it strengthened their case against the character of the three Jews. To spurn the service and worship of their rulers' deities was already insulting to the king and his benevolence. Now they had added to that insult the injury of flouting a direct decree of the king. It was not something Nebuchadnezzar would be able to ignore, even if they were wise and useful. The brave young men. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, It is true, O Shadrach, Meshach. Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Verse 15. Now, if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and disclaimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this manner. Verse 17. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Verse 18. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. The king's anger and final offer. Daniel 3:13 through 15. As the informants had hoped, Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage at their report and immediately ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in to answer for their insubordination. They were quickly hauled before the king, and the interrogation began. At this point, many wonder, where was Daniel? The fact that he is not mentioned once in this episode is puzzling for many. Why was he not accused before the king as well? Without information from the text, we cannot offer absolute answers, but we can note two facts. First, Daniel would never have bowed down to the golden statue. Such an act would have been inconceivable to a man who refused the king's diet because of God's law, Daniel 1, and later continued praying to the Lord despite another king's prohibition, Daniel 6. Second, the advisors certainly would not have missed a chance to entrap Daniel along with the others. Indeed, Daniel would have been the grand prize. If they could have caught him in disobedience, they would have pounced on him without hesitation, as King Darius's advisors did in chapter 6. The most reasonable answer, then, is that as one of the highest and most trusted officials in Nebuchadnezzar's court, 248, Daniel presumably made regular trips around and beyond the province to oversee the king's business. We can justifiably conclude that he was away from Babylon at this time on some matter of official business. If he had been present, he undoubtedly would have taken his place with the three men now facing the enraged king. It seems Nebuchadnezzar struggled to believe that anyone would dare defy his decree, especially Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom he had so generously favored. He therefore asked whether the report was true. Had they really refused to serve his gods and worship the golden image? Without waiting for the answer, the king decided to show his magnanimity once more. All they had to do was bow down one time when they heard the music play again, and all would be well. But if they refused, there would be no further appeal. They would be immediately thrown into the blazing furnace. The king ended with the challenge. What God would be able to rescue them from his power? The faithful men's resolute stand, Daniel 3:16 through 18. The reply of the three men was bold and perhaps a bit cheeky. They told the king that they did not owe him a response in the matter at hand. Then they proceeded to answer the challenge he had just uttered. Nebuchadnezzar had asked what God could possibly save them from his death sentence. They unambiguously declared to him that the God they served was fully able to rescue them from the blazing furnace. Not only that, but they were confident he actually would do so. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king, verse 17. Such confidence was surely the last thing Nebuchadnezzar expected. Then the three drew their line in the sand. By faith, they expected that God would deliver them, but they informed Nebuchadnezzar that even if he chose not to do so, they would not serve the king's gods or worship his golden statue. After centuries of Israel compromise with idolatry, here were three men who rejected idolatry in the face of a gruesome death. We would not be too far off the mark to call it one of God's people's finest hours. What happened next is well known, and we will cover it more next week. After declaring their refusal to bow, the three men were immediately tied up and thrown into the fiery furnace. The soldiers who obeyed the king's command were dramatically consumed by the ferocity of the flames. The three men who refused to obey the king, however, were not consumed. Instead, they enjoyed the fellowship of a fourth person, perhaps the pre-incarnate Christ himself. Arising from his throne, Nebuchadnezzar watched in astonishment at his humble command. They emerged unscathed from the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar immediately rendered honor the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who saved the three men who dared disobey the king. Questions. 1. What motive did Nebuchadnezzar have in setting up his golden image? 2. To whom does Chaldeans refer? Daniel 3:8. 3. For what purpose did these advisors come before the king? 4. Why did they tell the king the content of his own decree? 5. What was the penalty for disobeying the decree? 6. Why did the advisors remind the king that he had put the three Jewish men in high positions? 7. How did the king react to the advisor's report? 8. How did the three men answer the king's question? 9. Of what were the three men confident? 10. What was their attitude toward idolatry? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, September 8th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.